Hey, this is Melissa, and today I am here with you to make this cute little Tate jacket. This is a modification of the Tate pattern that we are making so that we can use this cute quilted fabric. You can see that it is double-sided, pre-quilted, available at Children's Corner, and it has some bias bindings all the way around all the edges. It still is double-breasted. It also has bound seams on the inside. So it's just a cute little casual jacket. What you're gonna need to make this pattern with is, of course, your Tate pattern. If you look on the back of the Tate pattern and you look on your fabric requirements, what you're gonna need is the amount for the View A lining. This little jacket is self-lined and it doesn't have a collar, so it's not gonna take as much fabric as the regular View A or View B would call for. We're going to use the View A lining, and that should be a good amount for you for making this jacket. Also, you're going to need a ½ yard of coordinating fabric that you're going to use to make your bias tape with. We are going to go ahead and make all of our own bias tape and bindings. I realize that is available for pre-purchase in some areas, but it's probably not the size that we're going to need for this jacket. I'm going to use a bias tape maker. This little red one is a 3/4 inch or number 18, and it makes it really convenient when you're making this much bias binding. So I recommend using one of these, and I'll show you how to use this as we go along. Also, this has some covered buttons, and covered buttons come in a pack of 6, and you're either going to need 4 or 6 for this little jacket. So one pack of 5/8 inch covered buttons is also what you need. And then also some tracing paper. There is a good bit of modifying to the pattern pieces. As we first get started, we will go through that. So go ahead and get everything together and come back, and we will begin with this little jacket. So like I said, we are just going to use 3 pattern pieces to make this little jacket. We are going to use the View B front, which is piece number 7. We're going to use the View B back, which is piece number 9, and then the sleeve piece, which is number 12. What you need to do to begin with is go ahead and trace all of those complete pattern pieces, including all the facings, button placement on the sleeves. You know, you'll need to have your dots and your fronts and your backs with your X's, also your fold lines for both the front and the sleeve, and then also your back piece. You'll also need to have that all traced with your pattern markings, especially the center back fold line. So after you have everything traced and cut out, come back and we will do the rest of the modifying. So we are ready to start modifying these pieces. I have everything traced and cut out. Now, remember, since we are putting bias bindings on the edges of everything, we are going to cut away some seam allowances because we won't need the seam allowance in some of these areas to fold under to stitch to the lining or anything like that. So this is my front piece, which is number 7, and I have gone ahead and traced the whole piece. And the main thing we're going to do on this is this fold line that goes right down the center. It's labeled fold line on your pattern piece. We are going to cut off this entire front facing along the fold line. So just get your paper scissors out and cut your pattern piece. And we are going to discard this entire facing. And this is going to be the front edge of the jacket. Now the next thing, after this facing has been cut off, is we need to cut away the seam allowance at the neck. So this 1/4 inch seam allowance right up here, I had also marked it, just the one at the neck, not the one at the shoulder, but I am going to go ahead and cut it away. Now, there's also a little area on the neck where the pattern piece has a little bit of a curve up, and we are going to go ahead and just cut that straight across as well, so that it will be straight across and there will be no little tip there sticking up, because this corner is going to have bias binding on it. So this is what our new front piece is going to look like. We've cut at the fold line, cut the neck seam allowance away, and then I've straightened out that little tip there. So that's what you need for the front piece. Now we will go to the back piece. Now remember, we have this View B piece that has been cut. Now this normally would have a pleat in the back, and we don't want to do a pleat. So we are going to cut away the area that would have been pleated in the center back. So there is a line that's called the center back line, and we are just going to cut that line all the way down and take away that extra space that would have been a pleat. I think a pleat actually is really cute on the back of this, but I think all that folding that would be required up there at the neck to go underneath that bias binding might be a little bit too much for this heavier weight fabric that we are working with. So now I've got this center back. And so after you have cut that pleated area away, you need to go ahead and label this new line here as cut on fold, because this is going to be placed on the fold as you cut your fabric out later. So this, I'm going to actually write that on here because I don't have it, but this is cut on fold. And then we also need to trim away the seam allowance just at this neckline curve on the back. And once we have done that, we are going to move to the sleeve. And for the sleeve, the only thing that we are going to need to trim away is the fold line at the bottom. So it is that lowest line that is on the pattern, and we are just going to cut that away. This is going to be the edge of our sleeve hem. And it is long enough that you can fold it up a little bit so that you can see the inside of the fabric, which is a real cute little look on it as well. So we've got the sleeve all finished. Now let's go back to these other two pieces, because this is actually a long jacket and we are going to make a short jacket. So we are really pretty much making what looks like the view B, but is going to be the length of the view A. So we need to use the view A finished length to shorten these two pattern pieces so that we can have a shorter length jacket. So what I'm going to do is start with the front pattern piece, and I am going to measure from this top corner up here, the very tip of the corner, straight down towards the bottom of my fabric. Now if I look on here, I am making a size 4, so my view A size finished length is 16 inches. So what I'm going to do is add 1/4 of an inch to that number, which would be 16 1/4, and I'm going to measure from this top tip of the corner straight down 16 1/4 inches, making sure that I have everything lined up straight. Helps to have a mat to do this on that has your straight lines, but making sure that I have everything lined up straight. And then I'm going to put a mark here at 16 1/4 on both sides of this little ruler. And then I can just draw a line straight across. And this is going to be my new length for this jacket. And we are just going to cut straight across the bottom. I like my other scissors better for this. I'm going to cut straight across the bottom. And now we have our new jacket length for the front. And we are going to go and do the same thing with our back pattern pieces. So my length that I was doing was 16 1/4. Just going to the tippy top of that corner right here and lining everything up. Let me do this here. So I have 16 1/4 here, and mark the same over here. And then I'm just going to draw a line straight across and then cut that off, and we will have our new length for the back pattern piece. And this is all we're going to need to do. So front, back, and sleeves have all been modified. So the next thing to do is to go about cutting out your fabric. So you're going to cut everything out using your 3 pattern pieces. Now, there is something to say about using this pre-pleated fabric or pre-quilted fabric. And I'm not sure about other pre-quilted fabrics, but this one has, in the quilting threads, a very long stitch length. So what that means is that these little edges up here along the edge, the quilting threads are really super likely to come out as you're manipulating the fabric. So once you have cut out your fabric, it is a good idea to go ahead and stitch all the way around the outside of your piece. Let's say it was your sleeve here and you had it all cut out. Stitch all the way around about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, just to secure those quilting threads so that they don't come unstitched on you as you're sewing this jacket. Just a good idea to do so that you don't get into trouble later. The other thing to know when you are cutting out this type of fabric is that you really probably need to do a little bit of what I call fussy cutting to make sure that you are lining up the grid on your quilting threads so that everything is nice and lined up. Just making sure, you know, that the edge of your fabric is straight along the edge of the quilting fabric, the quilting threads. That will make it for a nicer look as you get things going later on. So go ahead and do all the modifying of your pattern pieces, cut everything out, and when you get back, we will talk about the bias. So we have a lot to talk about with the bias tape on this jacket. First question I'm anticipating is, how much do I need? What I will tell you that on this little size 2 that I've made, I used about 4 yards of bias tape, which sounds like a whole lot, but that's just what it takes to do the bound seams on all the seams on the inside and then everything on the outside of the jacket as well. So I anticipate that the size 4 I'm making now is of course going to take more. Since the width of my coordinating fabric was 1/2 yard, that means that the bias strips that I have cut are around 28 inches long. So I have cut about 7 or 8 of those. If you need instruction on how to properly cut bias tape, there is a blog post that Susan did a little while back that can show you how to cut bias tape. But since that's already out there, I'm not going to go into the particulars about how you do that, but I will talk to you about a few other things about it. Now, on this particular jacket that we're doing, I have broken up all of the pieces of bias into smaller sections. So certainly on the outside binding, if you wanted to do one continuous strip of bias binding all the way around, that is certainly something you can do. If you're an experienced quilter or you've done a lot of binding, that may be something you want to do. But for this little jacket, I've broken it up into smaller pieces because I think it's easier for people who've never done it before just to do a section at a time. So what we're going to do is we will do the inside with the bound seams first, and then we'll start and do the 2 front edges and then the bottom and the neck, and that'll be the order that we do things in. So you are not going to have to do, since you do it in these small pieces, you're not going to have a lot of long strips of bias binding. You're not going to have a long continuous one, but you may have to join one strip to be able to make the width of the bottom of your jacket. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So I have one bias strip here. The strips that we're going to cut for this particular jacket are 1.5 inches wide. And I've got 2 of them here. And the way that you join them is you put this diagonal edge together, making kind of like a right angle with the rest of the strip. And it makes kind of a triangular overlap at the top, kind of an upside down triangle. And I'm going to pin that in place and then show it a little bit closer. But I have the 2 diagonally cut edges right up against each other. And I also have not put the corners exactly together because remember that our seam is going to go right across here. So it's okay for me to have a little bit of tabs on either end sticking out, which will be trimmed off later. So once you have it stitched together in this position like this, then you're going to go to your sewing machine and stitch across here just like this, just 1 stitch, 1/4 inch seam allowance. After you've done that, you press everything open, press those seams open and come back, and we will talk about putting it into the seam binder and making your bias tape. So you can see here that I've stitched across this end here, the diagonal end of my bias strip. Now what I'm going to do is cut the seam allowance, just trim it down to about 1/8 of an inch, and then I'm going to press it open. And this is going to give me a long length of strip here that we can use for the lower edge of the jacket. Now, once I have it pressed open, I can trim away these little edges, that little corner there that was kind of sticking out, and now I have my strip that I can use for the bottom. Okay, now I've got a bias strip here. It is 1.5 inches wide. We're going to use this 3/4 inch bias tape maker to make the bias tape. What you do is leave the end at a diagonal cut to start with, because that makes it easier to feed in to the bias tape maker. But you just feed it into this wide end and until it kind of pops out at the bottom. Now, if you have trouble getting it to come through the bottom, you can always take a pin or like an awl, and there's a space right in this section here that you can push it through with to kind of help you get a handle on it right here. But once you have the end pulled out, put it on your ironing board and stick a pin in it to secure it. Now what it's going to do is it's going to fold the fabric up and around so that the middle is folded in, so that the edges are folded into the middle. I'm going to take my iron and I'm just pulling on the bias tape maker, holding my iron right there at the edge of it, and I am pressing as I move, and as it does that, it just folds it for me. You can't go too quick. It is possible to get it off or get a wrinkle in it, something like that, but it does make it much more quick to make a lot of bias tape if you're having to do that for a project like this one. So now I've gotten to the end of my board. I'm just going to unpin it and come right back up here and finish up this little strip. And it is just putting those edges together right there at the middle. All right, so I have this piece all ironed together. You can see the edges are right there at the middle. Now the second step is that we need for this to be folded in half lengthwise. So the way I find it easiest to do is just to fold it on top of itself. It's probably possible to use the bias tape maker in a way to do this also, but I find it quicker just to do it like this. But all I'm doing is folding it with those folded edges together, and it's going to be one long double folded strip. I guess you could almost say it's triple folded because there's 2 edges folded first, and then this is the 3rd edge that's folded. But anyway, this is what we need. This is what we're going to use both for the bound seams and for the bias seams on the outside. And you might wonder, knowing that children's corner patterns have 1/4 inch seam allowances, why I would use a 3/8 of an inch strip. And the answer is because this quilted fabric is so thick. And whenever you're joining 2 pieces of thick fabric like this, that's just a lot of thickness to go through and to go around and to cover up. So I found it easier to go ahead and use a little bit wider strip just to cover everything a little bit better. So that is why we have 3/8 of an inch finished bias strips rather than 1/4 inch bias strips. So I have several of them made. Go ahead and make, I would say 6 to 8, 10, depending on what size you need. You should have plenty of bias, of fabric for your bias strips. I'm gonna get all the strips for the size 2 and this size 4 I'm making out of 1/2 yard piece of fabric. So there should be more than enough that you will need in your fabric allowance to make plenty of bias strips. Go ahead and do that and come back and we will get started with the construction.